Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis. Hope you've had a great Wednesday. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm your girl, Gigi, down here in Walterboro, day 22 in the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial in the books. I'm going to bring it all to you. But first, got to thank some people. Big thank you to Sarah, Lauren, Sarah, Laura, Lori, and Susan. I put the two L's side by side and my brain just went, nope, we're not going to do that. So thank you guys for your donations. I really super appreciate it. And a big thank you to my Walterboro family, Angie, and her amazing daughter for such a nice dinner over at Fat Jack's. And I have to say a big hello to Miss Jennifer Sanders, forensic science class over at South Point High School in Belmont, North Carolina. I got to meet your teacher, Miss Sanders, today, and some friends she was with. Such an awesome lady you guys have there teaching you all the tricks of the trade. Maybe one day you'll be up on the stand testifying in a criminal trial because we need good forensics people. So you guys keep on rocking it. I'm telling you. She's one of those people you talk to and you feel like you know her. And so I can just imagine how awesome of a teacher she is. She said the class listens. So big hello to all you forensics kids learning how to catch the bad guys. All right. Music fact of the day so that I don't forget, because that's how off I am, y'all. You know how I am with my music. And the other day when I left it out, it just rattled me a bit. I'm just off my rocker. Music fact of the day. I love the Beach Boys. My dad grew up in Florida. I grew up listening to the Beach Boys. They had 4 number 1 hits. Kokomo, Good Vibrations. That's my favorite. And then Help Me Rhonda and I Get Around. But check this out. My second favorite song by the Beach Boys, God Only Knows, only made it to number 39 on the Billboard Hot 100. Imagine that. That's like such a gorgeous song. It's a great song. It's a really good love song. And it's so weird that it starts out with, I may not always love you. But then it's like, as long as there are stars above you. Oh, I love music. Okay. So quick update about the bomb threat that seems like it was a year ago, by the way. They have identified who made that call that put us out. The one day that week, by the way, it was warm. We all were sticky when we went back in the courtroom that day, but they traced the call back to Jasper County's Department of Corrections to a Mr. Joey Dean Coleman, who was in possession of contraband, a cell phone. And he's the one who made the call. Doesn't seem like there's any connection to Alec Murdaugh, the Murdaugh family, this trial, or anything. So there you go. Mr. Coleman just tacked on a few years, I'm sure. So a bit of not an unexpected surprise, but always a surprise when you hear something like this. So before the jury is brought in, defense attorney Jim Griffin stands up and says, if Alec testifies, they want to limit the scope of the cross-exam. And so everybody shifted in their seats. You could hear it. I could hear behind me the collective noise of everybody turning to whisper or whatever. We all did it. And so we've heard for a couple of weeks now it's possible, but I think that this today got everybody excited. So Creighton Waters essentially was like, nah, dude, the cross exam's wide open. It's a free for all. And essentially that's going to be what he chooses if he gets on the stand. I do think he has to get on the stand, to be honest. There are questions only he can answer. I think the jury would appreciate hearing from him. Why on earth would you forget the kennel video? Or not the video, he knows being taken, but why would you not remember being at the kennels with your wife and son minutes before they're murdered? The very, very last time you see him, the deleted phone calls, the discrepancies in the timeline. I really think, what does he have to lose? I mean, this murder trial is not the financial trial, although sometimes it's felt like it, but I understand they had to bring it in. I kind of think that if he gets on the stand, the best thing the state can do is not make it about the financials, because I think the jury is getting a little tired of the financial stuff, to be honest. I'm seeing it a little bit. They're very attentive, but you can tell when they are intrigued by a witness, and they've been intrigued by witnesses from both sides. I say it every day. I love this jury. They are hardworking. They are on it. But I think it definitely is a gamble. But sometimes you got to take gambles if you potentially want to. I don't think it'll ever be a not guilty. I think either it's going to be guilty or hung. But I think it's something that he's going to have to do to move that ball forward. So we shall see. The state is still, as far as we know, expecting to rest on Friday. So it would be either late tomorrow or Friday when they put him on. I know his brother, John Marvin, I thought was going to go on today. That's what we had heard. His attorney was with him. But we did have a couple of witnesses who I know the housekeeper, maybe they had to work her in. I'm not sure why people didn't get on today, but I'm interested to hear from his brother. And I, I have to say that it really, you can see the love that he had for Paul, John Marvin. And it's every time they play that kennel video, I have to say, when he hears Maggie say he's got a bird in his mouth, he just laughs. And it's hard to see the family sometimes, but I can usually see the side of his face. And so, anyways, that's got to be very, very stressful for anybody getting up there to talk. But, anyways, so the judge ultimately says he is not going to issue any ruling on it in advance on the scope of cross exam. He says a blanket order like that's kind of unheard of. So, we will see. All right. So the first witness was Mark Ball. He was a former firm partner of Alex. He's known him 34 years. Their kids grew up together, and their wives are also really good friends. And he found out about the murders from Mr. Crosby, who is another partner there at the firm. He's testified in this trial. That partner called his wife and said to get over to Mizell. So they went straight there. He said they got there around 10:50 at night. They pulled in by the cabin to park, and he said on the radio, I'm thinking maybe what he's talking about is like the police scanner, that two people were dead. And so he knew that Maggie and Paul were gone. He mentions about the road not being blocked off and people just pouring into that property. He walked around the shed and people were walking between the two main areas. So just again, you see how the defense is jumping on how the crime scene was handled. He could see Paul's body covered with a sheet, and he said it was misty out with some intermittent sprinkling going on. He noticed that water was coming off of the roof and onto Paul, and it worried him because this is a crime scene and that's not good. He also said it ticked him off, and he thought it was disrespectful because he said Paul was a good young man. So they eventually had put that tent over Maggie, but never one over Paul. So once he got there, Alec met him halfway to where he was, which was the shed. And he said Alec went to pieces. He said he's a big man and he just smothers you when he gives you a hug. He was devastated, beside himself, and crying. He kept saying to Mr. Ball, look what they did. Sled got there within an hour to an hour and a half after Mark Ball and his wife arrived. He said all the lawyers from the firm were there, with the exception of maybe two or three who had smaller kids or another reason they couldn't just up and leave their house. Eventually, they were all told to go to the main residence, and Mr. Ball was a little worried. He said, it's a huge farm, number one. Number two people are dead. Is it safe in that house? And also, number three, isn't the house part of the crime scene? But they went to the house, and he said there were no signs it had been searched. We know at that point it had not anyway. He was asked by law enforcement if he knew who may have done this. And so he told law enforcement about Paul getting threats since the boat crash. He said that Alec would mention that to him from time to time. Another thing he noted, he saw a golf cart parked by the house that night to the left or right side. Yeah, I didn't put that. But there was a golf cart there. In the house, the people he knew were the firm partners, Randy, Buster's girlfriend, Chris Wilson, and a host of other people, according to him, were in that house. When they came to get Alec's clothes, he thought they would have been wet that night. He was asked, and he said his clothes were wet. He would just assume that Alec's were too. It was misting and, as we know, kind of sprinkling. They left Moselle at 3:30 or 4, around the same time Alec left, and went back the next day. He went to the kennel area. That morning, the crime scene had been released, and Randy Murdaugh asked if he could find someone to a company to come clean this crime scene up. So he called the coroner's office, who then referred him to a company who does this. He said he wandered around. He noted that Sled, Duffy Stone, and an investigator was there. So he looked into the feed room and he called it a, quote, raw scene, into that quote. There was birdshot on the floor. He said it was all over the place. And he also saw a piece of Paul's skull on the floor, and he said it infuriated him. He said there was blood and tissue, and it was like walking across a grave. So back to the house. Maggie's dad was there, and there were other people. Sled came to search the house while he was there. He said they were gathered in the gun room, and this was probably around 2:30 to 3 in the afternoon, the day after the murders. He asked Sled what kind of gun was used in the murders. He was told a blackout. So he told him it's over there. Remember, they were in the gun room, and he found it for Sled. There also have been 3 shotguns as well as some shotgun shells on that pool table the night of the murders, but it was gone. And Blanca said she had been asked to clean up. He also remembers seeing CB Rowe there that morning, and he also took pictures of a truck that was near the hangar on the property. It didn't have a license plate, and he also saw bleach in the bed of that truck. That seemed a little odd, so he snapped a picture of that. He saw that cooler with beer cans in it and said it looked like really somebody had just unloaded a boat. We never unloaded our cooler when we got off boats. I don't know if you guys do. It's just that little laziness. You know, you've been out in the sun all day. There's like no sleep or tired that's deeper than when you've been out on a boat on the beach all day. I don't know. I always sleep the best at the beach. So when asked about the voices on the kennel, they didn't play it, but he had heard it prior to his testimony today. He recognized all 3 as Alec, Maggie, and Paul. So they play the police interview with Alec in the car, and Mark hears they did him so bad, which is what Mark was saying, Alec was saying the night of the murders. They did him so bad. He said the civil case in the boat accident was concerning for Alec, and as a whole, the reaction to the crash, as we know, was negative towards the family. They talk about him resigning from the firm on September 3rd of 2021. We talk about the roadside shooting on the 4th. And then he said on the 5th, day after that roadside shooting, he went into Alec's office to look for client files. They were worried that they would miss a deadline because these cases go on even if your lawyer has been forced to resign from the company. These cases still have deadlines. You have dates you have to be somewhere for court, whatever. So he went in, and in his desk, in Alec's desk, Mark found a tablet with a list of his debts and assets. So clearly he's doing the math here. Like we know Mark Tinsley had said to the press 40 million, and that worried Maggie. So 2 days after the murders, he got a phone call. Him and his wife and the coroner used to work together. And the coroner said that Maggie's jewelry had been cleaned and they could come pick it up. Somebody on our live Q&A today asked why they would clean the jewelry. It's probably just a courtesy so that you're not handing back rings or necklaces that have biological materials on them, blood, any kind of tissue. He wasn't sure which rings they gave him, but he did say that her diamond bracelet was in pieces. The coroner said they tried to find all of it, but that's interesting because I'm curious. You know, it could be as simple as she got it caught on something, but at the same time, did she have a struggle? I mean, you don't necessarily have bruises on your face or your arms if you struggled with your attacker. You don't necessarily have defensive wounds. I'm curious if that wrist wound maybe wasn't a defensive wound. You know, it seems like defensive wounds for shotguns kind of go up the arm or like that. I mean, we'll never know, but things run around in my brain sometimes. He said he thought Alec loved his family very much, but after September 3rd, which is when he resigns from the law firm, he's not sure he knew Alec. So Maggie was active on Facebook, and his wife would show him pictures that Maggie would post with Alec and the boys. So, you know, that's one thing a lot of people have asked me, when are we going to hear about the affairs? I think it would have come in by now if they had any proof. And I really think her sister probably would have testified to that. It seems like they were close enough. If Maggie were concerned about the state of her marriage, maybe she would tell her sister, but her sister, if you remember when she testified, she said Maggie was happy. And I'm sure that the stress of everything with the boat crash was hard. And especially when you think your son wasn't driving and that kind of thing. The odds were that more people were not going to be happy with them than those who would be happy to see them in the town of Hampton, because, you got to think these are people who have gotten away with a lot over the years. So I'm sure that was sort of the mentality of people around here, and it was across the country. He said that Paul was a good kid. He never had an issue with him at all. He said, I know Paul did mischievous things. He had seen videos of Paul driving too fast one time. So what did he do? He talked to Alec about it. He said, we're family. If anyone on our staff has a problem, we all have a problem. He never knew Alec had an opioid addiction, and he really doesn't think anybody else at the firm knew either. So he said ultimately Alec betrayed them when he stole the money. So on Cross, y'all, okay, if you're not on YouTube, I just looked over. I didn't have a ghost in my room because I just heard somebody walking towards me. I'm here alone. It's crazy. I got cold chills. Woof. He said that Alec just betrayed them when he stole the money. So on Cross, he said Alec was good at hiding who he was. The prosecutor said that. And he said, yeah. Buster and his daughter went to school together from kindergarten on. And he said, you have to trust someone you're in business with for over 20 years. And it's true. It really is true. I can't imagine these people like Mr. Crosby, Mr. Ball, these people that have been friends with Alec for decades, to find out that this person had this old alter ego that you never knew about. You can tell, like Jean Seckinger, she is a firecracker. I love her to death. I don't know her, but I love her. I mean, she didn't mince words. She let it be known. She's still mad. I think Mr. Crosby was more sad, to where I think Mark Ball was a mixture of a lot of things, just mad, sad. He seems almost like he's a little shocked even to this day that this has went down. And I just can't imagine. He said they worried about everybody's safety at the firm after the murders. And he had talked to Alec about what he did that night, just wanting to help get to the bottom. Maybe, they can solve this. They can talk it out. He said Alec responded appropriately, but get this, denied going to the kennels 3 times. That kennel video is, I think, the center of this case. I think it just totally is what the jury has got to hear an explanation for. No doubt. He told Mr. Ball they ate dinner, took a nap, checked on his mom, all the same version each time. And it's the same thing he told the other partners. He said that Jim Griffin, his current defense attorney, and was his defense attorney at this time, was there during this conversation, but he wasn't sure if Jim Griffin was present there when this specifically about what he did that night was being discussed. He also said that Alec's story about checking the bodies flip-flopped. It was Paul first, Maggie first. He didn't think about, at the time that it was much to be worrying about, but he said over time it did oscillate in his brain. The firm shut down, as we know, in the days after the murder, so everybody could grieve and support the family. So when the statement was made, there's no danger to the public, he thought, we have to make sure our employees are safe. He was worried that somebody crazy would just walk in there and hurt them. And it's a very real concern these days, even without all this going on behind it. He said they shared safety tips with their employees, but ultimately people were just on edge. He talked about how Alec never met a stranger, said he could talk to a fence post, and that he was a good lawyer in getting results for his clients. Maybe that was true, but when the clients knew they got results, unfortunately, that's a lot of innocent, needy people were stolen from. It blows my mind. He said the legacy of the family seemed most important to Alec, but it's because of him now it's so prominent. He worked with Jean to find other stolen money after all this. They found back in 2017 at the beginning of the year. Remember, the partners all kind of have to pitch in for a loan. Not all. Some lawyers will pitch in to loan the firm money, which covers costs. And remember, that check was mistakenly made out to Alec and not his brother Randy. So what did Alec do? He asked for another check, saying he had lost the original one, and he cashed it and waited a while and then deposited that original check as well, and never said, "Hey, you guys have made a mistake. This is not my money." He used private planes for his own use and would build a law firm. And also, he would use company credit cards for personal use. And Mr. Ball said one time he even paid college tuition with that. They were worried that he would have assets for the boat case, and the firm just did not want a thing to do with that. He did not know that Gene had approached Alec about the missing money until the day after the murders. He said Maggie was their friend and Paul was close to his daughter. He said he was a good kid, very polite. If he called Paul and needed help, Paul would have been right there. He said, did Paul do devilish things? Yes. It's a waste for a kid who never found his potential. And the state brings up the many clients that Alex stole from, including a deputy, highway patrol deputy who was hurt on the job. This poor man, Mr. Ball, had to tell clients that Alex stole their money and lied to them. They're still dealing with this as of now. He said 2-3 weeks ago, still having to do stuff about this stolen money. One client in particular, Barrett Bullaware, close friend of Alex, their house burned down and they had been awarded some money for cleanup. Well, what did Alex do? Took $75,000 of that. Later on, they learned that he had stolen another $279,000, and that was one of his closest friends. He said they're still straightening out this mess that he made by stealing from clients. And unfortunately, the firm partners are having to pony up. Our next partner is Athletic Greens. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because I'm always busy and my diet isn't the best, but I still want to get all the vitamins my body needs without taking a ton of pills. I take AG1 in the morning before my first cup of coffee and it makes me feel ready to take on my day. Why take a bunch of different things when you can just mix 1 scoop of powder in water once a day? It's the healthiest thing you can do in under a minute. With 1 scoop, I'm getting 75 vitamins and minerals that help my mood, energy levels, and healthier hair, skin, and nails. It's delivered to me every month, and it's been the easiest way to arm my body with everything it needs to tackle my day. If you're looking for an easier way to take supplements, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. That's athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. Check it out. He thought Alec was strained financially. If you remember, I think about a week ago, we talked about how he went in with somebody or a few people and bought some real estate. And then what happened? The recession comes. It just was not good for anybody that owned land. But he assumed with the big fees that Alec had coming in before all this hit the fan, that he would be okay, and he had it all straightened out. The decision to kick him out of the firm was unanimous on September the 3rd. So the next day, on the day of the roadside shooting, September 4th, they told his attorney, Jim Griffin, that he was fired. So what happens later? Jim Griffin calls him and says, hey, Alec's been shot. And he said, my first thought was that jackass killed himself. He said, why would you think that? And he said, well, he's lost his wife and son. He's lost his job. It's a lot. But Jim Griffin said, no, somebody shot him. But Mark said, don't believe it. So what did Mark do? He went to the scene of the roadside shooting. And when he got out of his car, Randy was there and Mr. Crosby was there, the other law firm partner. He saw the run flats and he said, typically those don't have a spare, which is right. I used to have run flats. Then he saw the slit in the tire, red flag, just went straight up. The firm actually consulted with an attorney just to see what they needed to do about the whole Alec situation in general. So on redirect, they talk about the firm is still holding money for clients as of 2 weeks ago, and the partners ponied up their own money to repay clients. He said Alec would come to the firm and look at sympathy notes that people had sent him. He would cry in his office, and Mark encouraged him to get professional help. He said Paul would come to his and Mr. Crosby's property a lot to hunt. And he also said that Paul and Alec were together a lot. The firm repaid, get this, so far about $10 to $11 million, y'all. Insurance paid for some, but a big chunk, Mark said, came out of my own pockets, as well as the other partners. His feelings about Alec, I'm mad. You don't know how mad I am. When asked if he knew Alec had a $12 million life insurance policy, Mark Ball said I'd have to see it to believe it. Then they kind of end it with, he told you he was at the kennel 3 times. We know that's a lie. He said, yep. So the next witness, Mr. Cooke Jr. I do not have his first name here. He is an attorney in Charleston, and he works in civil litigation. He had been defending Alec in the boat case since December of 2020. He came on when one of the attorneys was sick with cancer. If you remember, both those attorneys, the 2 attorneys, very shortly after one another were diagnosed with cancer. And he said it was negligent parenting since Alec knew Paul was using Buster's ID. He talks about the motion to compel for the financials. Remember, they think that that's what he was avoiding when he did the double murders. That was actually had been rescheduled from May to that June 10th. And the motions worried Alec when, so then they ask him about Alec. You didn't know about his truth management issues? And the witness says, no, truth management. That's funny. On a redirect, they just make clear if the judge had ordered Alec to produce his financials, he wouldn't have had to turn that over in June. And that's correct. So they're just trying to put a little doubt in that motive. So Ken Zerci, footwear impressions, crime scene, etc. Smart dude. I enjoyed listening to him. He said photography is key in crime scene. You can't take the crime scene with you, and photos are heavily relied upon to investigate well after that crime scene has been released. So for photographs, he uses the FUSS technique, FUSS. It's the key to good crime scene photos. You fill the frame, use scale, use a side light, and you take several shots. He also prefers to use tripods for stability. So they play the crime scene video, and the defense stops it at Paul's body, and they point out there is an officer who steps inside that feed room. The witness says it's standard operating procedure to have on protective booties. And then he's asked about the sheet that's covering Paul in this video. And he said, it depends on the circumstance whether or not you should cover a victim with a sheet. He said Paul wasn't in a public access area, and he probably would have used a tarp as a last resort if needed. But the blanket ultimately is not a good idea because for both Maggie and Paul, remember they both were covered, it can absorb trace DNA, which can be incriminating, or it can be something that gets you out of these charges if they find somebody else's stuff on there. But the blankets should have been preserved and taken with the remains for DNA testing or analysis. That was not done as far as he can see. Same with Maggie and Paul's clothing. It should have been tested for gunshot residue and have it available for pattern analysis and where the wounds went in. No evidence that happened. They talk about the footwear impression from Paul found in the feed room and how the photos just weren't good for him to make a comparison. He would have walked in the doorway and worked his way back. That's how he rolls in a crime scene. Instead of going straight back and tracking to the front, just work your way back. And then you got a really small area by the end of it. So they talk about the fact that there is a sequence to a crime scene. He said it's a sequence and you got to follow that sequence. So the shoe imprint was found to the right of the door, and the photos for comparison should have been done in a very specific way. You decide first, do you need a chemical agent to help highlight that impression? Then you take an overview picture of what you've done. He said you can take the concrete that has the print on it, but it's a lot of work. I've seen cases where they take like a square of tile or one of those long like snap in flooring. They can take that, but crime scene you got to get, or for concrete at a crime scene you got to get like a jackhammer and all that. But the impression photos weren't done the way they should be, so ultimately he could not make comparisons to match that shoe. He also saw no evidence that they took any blood from that feed room for DNA testing, and also no evidence that they dusted the room for fingerprints. So then he talks about the various methods they use to find fingerprints, palm prints, like the specific lights they can use. They talk about the super glue method to reveal like hidden prints. I've seen it on forensic files. It's so cool. They put the object and sometimes I think they can bag it or they put it in a box and then they put in a super glue container and they heat it up and like that print it just appears. It's really cool. Man, in my next life, I should be a forensic like person. That'd be fun. I mean, not fun, but it's intriguing to me what people think they get away with stuff. And then you find one carpet fiber and they can trace it back to, well, this company did it and they shipped this much to this city on this date. Oh, here's the stores. Oh, it's insane what they can do. I love it. So there's multiple footwear impressions throughout that crime scene. And he said Maggie's prints in the sand were on top. This is a photo here. There'll be a link in the description for those of you not on YouTube. But they talk about these being on top. She was the last one to walk there. The defense points out more work could have been done at the crime scene, and that potentially could have exonerated Alec. So on cross, he got the records for this case 2 to 3 months ago, but not the entire file. He got some as recently as today. And he was not asked to write a report for this case. So the state's like, well, can we have your notes? Can you provide those? And he's like, they're on my computer, not here, but you're welcome to them. The state also tells him, hey, we got your PowerPoint last night around 10. When did you do it? He said a week ago. They always ask about pay and how much they're getting paid to be here. And they say he's being paid just to say Colleton County and SLED did a bad job and that he's second guessing them. The witness points out why the image of Maggie's footprints is bad and had a limited value for analysis. He said it doesn't even give him an idea for the size of the shoe print to compare. So the SLED agent's report said that there was an unknown footwear impression consistent with had to turn my air off, y'all, because it's loud. She said that the unknown footwear impression was consistent with Paul's shoes, but there's limitations on what could be examined. This is in the SLED agent's report, by the way. He said he agreed with her on that there are limitations. The witness says he's never been to the crime scene, and the prosecution's like, you've never been to the crime scene? And so he said, the crime scene's done. I don't need to go there. So the state reminds him again that he doesn't have a report. And he's like, I know, I've said it 3 times. So we're on redirect. I like this guy. I tell you, Dr. Kenzie was back in the courtroom today. My favorite witness, my favorite prosecution witness of this trial by far. I'd heard there was a chance he may be testifying again. I don't know if they're going to bring him up. I sure hope so. That dude needs to put out videos, like teaching videos. I'd pay to watch him. He's so good. So on redirect, defense said the prints were walked over. Impressions could have more detail with the use of chemicals, and they could have done more to be sure the prints in the feed room weren't the killers. So the report says consistent with Paul's, but ultimately the defense says so another shoe could have made the print. Up next, Miss Barbara Mixson. I'm going to tell you right now, I bet she is the sweetest lady. She just felt like grandma on the stand. Oh my gosh. So she has been a caregiver for Miss Libby for a very, very long time. She works the 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. And she says she knows the Murdaugh kids as good as she knows her own, talking about the big kids. Maggie was like a daughter and a friend, and she talked to Maggie every day, even on the day of the murders. She said Alec checked on his folks about every day by himself. And on the day of the murders, as we know, John Marvin Murdaugh took his dad to the doctor. Ultimately, he was admitted to the hospital. He was terminal. Well, that day, Miss Libby was agitated that Randolph wasn't there. So she was crying. She wouldn't eat. And Miss Mixson, what does she do? They show a phone record from 3:58 p.m. where she called Alec and said, your mom's agitated. And he said, I'll come check on her. She learned about the murders from an officer. She was sitting on her porch and they pulled up and told her that Paul and Maggie had been murdered. And she wanted to go to Moselle, but she was told she couldn't go. She never saw a tarp on Miss Libby's chair like Shelley did. And so on cross, do you love Alex? She said, I do. They're all like my kids. You didn't tell us about the conversation with Alex? And she said, no, sir. And he asked, when did they ask you about it? Meaning the defense. And she says, I don't know. But I tell you, when she got off the stand, Alec looked at her and said, I love you. And you can tell She loves that family. She went down the line. All the Murdaughs gave her a hug and a kiss. It was really sweet. And sounds like Miss Libby's had some good caretakers for herself to make sure she's good. Just seem like sweet women. So the last witness of the day, Michael Sturgis. He's in digital forensics. This got very technical, kind of a repeat of some of the things we've heard. There were a couple of things that he thought differently about, and we'll go over that. Maggie's phone had nothing for GPS the day or the night of the murders, and he points out if her phone had been secured in a Faraday bag or box, the GPS from the day of the murders likely could have been saved. He explains kind of the innards of an iPhone and how it records your steps and that kind of thing. So the witness says that at the time Alec was passing where Maggie's phone was found, her phone was locked. There's a demonstration he does to the jury just to show it only takes a tiny bit of movement to get that backlight to come on. And he says when the backlight comes on, that also initiates an orientation change. He passes the location of where the phone was found, going to his mom's at 9:08, then again coming back at 9:59. Maggie's phone was locked, and at these times there was no backlights on. But here's the kicker. The defense is saying that he didn't pass by that spot until 9:06. That's 2 minutes after the state says the phone was ditched. So that's interesting. At 8:54, there's a 1-second camera activation on her phone. The phone doesn't tell if Face ID was attempted, but it looks like someone was maybe trying to left swipe to access the camera. If you have an iPhone with a code, you can literally take your phone while it's locked and you can swipe to the left. Well, I think, yeah, see, I'm locked. But if you swipe with that phone locked, you can still get to your camera. So he was showing that. He thoroughly goes through all those orientation changes to her phone. I've covered it a couple of times on previous episodes. If you want to hear all about it, if it's new to you, I will put out the link to that. But on Cross, he thinks her software on the phone, her iPhone, was 14 something. Incoming call from Alec was at 9:06. Then an orientation change triggered, which was likely related to that call. On redirect, the defense says if he had tossed the phone from the car at 45 miles an hour, it would have at least turned on her backlight. And he agrees and said it did not come on. Here's something too. They talk about Siri was accessed. The side button was pushed at 8:53 p.m. And I have a theory. Y'all, I don't do speculation and rumor, but this is just, I'm gonna pass this on to theory side. Okay, so when Dr. Kinsey testified about Paul's first chest wound, remember, he said he was hurting. He had over 20 entry and exit wounds in the arm. He was bleeding. Remember, he said there were fat blood drops on the ground with no tail, which tells him coming down past the short sleeve, nothing to catch it, drips off your fingers and makes this round blood drop. Didn't have a tail, so there was no, if there were motion, it was very subtle. Then he said he probably stood there for a minute and went very slow to that door frame. And then we know that's when the fatal shot come. Here's my thing. We know at 8:49 their phone's locked forever. So this is at 8:53 when that side button Siri is accessed. If it takes Paul a couple of minutes, so you're looking at, let's say 52, maybe it takes a couple of minutes after that first shot for Paul to actually be murdered. I've always, and I said this last night, what was Maggie doing? Was she frantic? If you look at where her body was found, it was kind of just in the grass. That poor woman had to have seen her baby on the ground in that state. I wonder if that 8:53 side button was not maybe an attempt with iPhones. You can press, if you press your power button and one of your other buttons, it'll call 911. I wonder if that's what she was doing, hitting the side button for Siri. I mean, it's just a theory, but I just think that there had to be a little gap in there of time after Paul was shot and when Maggie was killed. The other way it could have happened would be if he shot Paul once, thought he was going to be dead, goes and shoots Maggie. And then maybe at that point, Paul's made the way to the door. But I don't know. I just feel like Maggie tried to run. And these photos right here, if you look, they're the last ones, and they're pretty sure those were Maggie's. Was she kind of pacing back and forth the length of that building to hide? Is that hiding up against the ATV? I'm telling you, man, it's haunting to think what she saw before she was killed. So they reiterate, had that phone been put in a Faraday bag, we might have some GPS. Yes. So they say between 902 and 906, there are a series of steps on Alec's phone. They can't tell if the phone stopped at any point. He said he could have walked 200 of those steps in the first minute or two and then slowed down. So also the last thing, any reason to think the kennel video wasn't recorded at 8:44 p.m.? He said there's no reason to think it was recorded after that. So, or before that. So that was kind of it. It was a good day. I think tomorrow and Friday are going to be big, big days, because if Alec takes the stand, huge, just huge. But then we should hear from his brother tomorrow, I'm hearing, and who knows what else. Then we'll have rebuttal, I think starting Monday. It could be lengthy. And then who knows, man, maybe next Friday or so we have a verdict. I think it could be a long deliberation though. And it should be. They haven't been able to take notes. There's a lot of information here. If it takes them a month to come to their conclusion, then we wait, because that's how it works, y'all. All right. Thanks for trusting me with the facts. I'll be back tomorrow to do it again. You can catch me on Law and Crime when court's in recess. An hour at lunch for the live Q&A. I always had a blast. We had Joe McCullough on today, one of my favorite people in the court. I have a lot of favorite people in the courtroom, though. Joe is the most popular guy there. Just have so many new friends now, and I love it. So anyways, all right, I'm going to get this uploaded, get into bed so I can get up and bring it to you again. I appreciate you guys so much. Have a good rest of your night.